Everyone, Oli here, and this is my review of State of Decay, the fourth story of the 18th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Tom Baker as the fourth Doctor. State of Decay is a 113 story overall, it's 4 parts long, and it's written by Terrence Dicks. So, State of Decay is the second story of the E-Space Trilogy, where the TARDIS is pretty much trapped in another universe. So, the plot of State of Decay is as follows. The Doctor, Romana, and Kanan are still trapped in E-Space, a strange alternative universe. They are unable to find an escape and do not realize a young boy called Adric has stowed away aboard the TARDIS. Arriving on a primitive planet where the local inhabitants fear the Free Who rule, they soon find themselves facing a hideous creature from Time Lord legends, long thought dead. The Doctor must confront a blood-sucking monster that is very much alive. So that is the plot of State of Decay, ladies and gents. So, I think State of Decay is a very good story, definitely one of the best stories of season 18. And originally, State of Decay was meant to be a part of season 15, and it was initially called The Vampire Mutations, but it was shelved because I think there was a Dracula show that was airing on BBC around the same time as season 15, so they pretty much had to shelve it for another season, and the opportunity to come back to air this story, but they pretty much had to change some aspects around, especially having the E-Space plot into it, fitting in like the themes of entropy and pretty much having to put Adric in the story. And obviously changing whoever it was that was a companion at the time, I think it was Leela to Romano. So I think the plot of the story the production of the story was very well done. I liked how gothic State of Decay was. It was very much like a Philip Hinchcliffe era story. Because his stories were very known to be quite gothic, which was pretty much what made Doctor Who so popular in the first. Well, Tom Baker it quite popular in the first place. The sets looked very great. They looked very great, especially when the villagers were, especially where the villagers were living in, and how even part of the tower where the Free Who resided was pretty much Gothic personified. And even though it was actually part of a rocket ship called the Hydrax, and I liked how pretty much both of these seems like merged together. The location filming was brilliant, and it looked very much like a Hammer horror movie. Very atmospheric, very spooky, very good special effects, especially the scene in the scanner where we see the great vampire. And the script was very good, and I think the direction by Peter Moffat was quite good as well. And I think the plot of State of Decay is definitely was very good, and was definitely one of the main stories where the theme of entropy was pretty much featured in this season. Defined by Doctor Who Wiki, entropy is basically the second law of thermodynamics, and it was the slow, irreversible process of breakdown and decay whereby a complex organized system inevitably degraded into chaotic ones. And the vampire planet itself was like evolving backwards, like it was starting to become like more primitive as the decades went by, and obviously the Free Who rule when they died because they were pretty much made immortal and they've been around since 1998. We were stuck on E-Space since 1998, so this story was set in the 32nd century, so to speak. So when they die, they pretty much like quickly decay, like they like rapidly age and they just die off, and you see them as skeletons at the end, and which I thought was quite interesting. And we definitely see the more we have actually seen the theme of entropy in this season. We definitely see more of it by the end of this season. So, and I actually found that part more interesting. And I also have this bit of a soft spot for State of Decay because I like some vampire media, especially Buffy the Vampire Slayer and other vampire stuff. Not Twilight, but Buffy the Vampire Slayer is definitely up there. And I definitely think that mixing like vampire lore with sci-fi was a very interesting element and a very interesting combo that we didn't need. But I also liked how the Free Who were basically like humans from 1998, and they got caught up in E-Space by the CVE, and they ended up on the vampire planet, and they were turned into vampires by the Great Vampire. So this story, I think, had a lot of memorable moments, such as the cliffhangers for part 2. Well, the cliffhangers in the story in general are quite cool. Especially part 3's cliffhanger, when the three pretty much capture Romana when the rescue attempt of Romana and Adrian pretty much failed. And then I like the scene where the three were pretty much about to sacrifice Romana. It was very scary and it was probably one of the most gothic scenes I've ever seen in Doctor Who. And this is when, especially the part when the vampire pretty much went to her neck and sucked her blood, and she was raped when Romana was pretty much wearing a very sacrificial robe or something like that. That was quite scary and it was very gothic, so to speak. As I said before, I also like how the Doctor was able to save the day. He was able to use one of the shuttles from the Hydrax to kill the Great Vampire by launching it into space and pretty much sticking its heart. And the Great Vampire itself looked very terrifying. We see a scan of it in part 4, and we also see its hand trying to come out of underneath the Hydrax in part 4, but then obviously he was sticked and he ended up dying. So on to the acting. I think Tom Baker was great in the story. I think this is one of his best performances of the season. He's still in serious movies, but he does have some humor. But then this is when Tarek tried to rescue the Doctor Romani. He came into the tower and then he pretty much opens the door, but he forgot. I think he didn't realize that the Doctor was behind the door, and he pretty much accidentally squashes the Doctor. I don't think that scene may not have been in the script, but I do like how the Doctor was able to realize how the three who were vampires were pretty much telling Romana about how every planet or every form of civilization has some form of the vampire myth. And I think the seriousness of series 8, season 18 is benefiting Tom Bacon and is definitely giving him more range other than being just a Doctor who just pulled jokes all the time. Even though it actually did see a side of him being more serious in Philip Hinchcliffe era, but I think the comedy and the seriousness are pretty much as an even an even playing field, so to speak. But I do like how he works well at Adric, and even though they only have one scene with each other, and that was towards the end of the story, but we do see the Doctor and Adric together a bit more together a bit towards the end of the season. Lala Ward was quite good in the story, as she spends a lot of time with the Doctor in the story. Except for the part where she gets captured at the end of part 3. She also does benefit from the seriousness of season 18 also, and she does get to do more things aside from doing more humorous things. And for some reason, Romana is quite snappy in the story, especially towards Adric, and she pretty much snaps at Adric when he suggested that the Doctor can pretty much take off in the TARDIS whenever he likes. And obviously, I think this was due to the fact that Lala Ward didn't really like Matthew Waterhouse in real life, and the delivery of her lines to Adric was very obvious in the storyline in Warrior's Gate. However, I did like the scene when the Doctor and Romana were in the cell, and when they were in the cell, and the Doctor was pretty much telling Romana that she's wonderful, which she obviously took as a compliment, and it just shows how good the chemistry was. And they didn't really need humor to pretty much emphasize how good they are as a duo, but then obviously they weren't making only eye contact with each other in this story, because I think their relationship was starting to get a bit worse, but which I do find ironic, because when State of Decay was actually airing, well, a week after State of Decay aired, I think that's when they actually got married. Right, I thought that was quite funny. K9 was good as well, and he doesn't get destroyed or deactivated in some way, shape, or form. And I actually kind of like that K9 pretty much spends his penultimate story just gunning down soldiers and stuff like that. And I thought that was quite cool. And I like how Adric Waterhouse was good in the story. He was alright. This is actually the first story he actually films as Adric. And I did like the team. He pretty much comes out of hiding in the TARDIS and he pretty much just he just waddles out of the room and he's caught by K9, and then Adric pretty much tricks K9 with logic to leaving the TARDIS, and that was a very funny scene, so to speak. So Adric doesn't really do much because he ends up getting captured by the three who rule at the start, and then he's pretty much in hypnosis for at least a good chunk of the middle part of the story, and then pretty much afterwards he's rescued by the Doctor Romana, and he just goes back in the TARDIS, and the Doctor says he has to go home, but then he couldn't. The side cast of the story, we had Tarek. He was a member of Kalmar's rebellion against the Free Who Rule. He went to the tower to try and look for the Doctor and Roman, and he later aided Roman in looking for Adric, but he was later killed by Zargo, and I thought he was a good character. Then we had Kelmer. He was a scientist that led the rebellion against the Free Who rule. He showed the Doctor how to use the technology that the Free were using, and in return, the Doctor showed Kalmar how to use the technology, to use the scanners that they salvaged. And when the vampires were defeated, the Doctor pretty much fixed the technology in hopes that the planet would become more civilized. And I thought he was a very good character. He's definitely one of my favorite characters in this story. Well, he is my favorite character in the story. Then we had Ivo, I don't know how to pronounce his name. He was one of the head people in the village. He was upset that his son Carl was taken to the Free Who rule, and I think they were going to use Carl for something, for a sacrifice for the for the great vampire. And he joined forces with the rebellion, and he agreed to attack the castle with the tower with the rebellion. And he killed Habris, his former friend, to avenge his son. And I think he was an alright character. Then we had Habris, I don't know how to pronounce his name, I've forgotten. He was a captain of the guard, and he served the Free Who rule. He was responsible for choosing people for the Free, and when he chose Ivor's son, Carl, he felt quite betrayed, and he obviously mistook the Dr. Romano for Laws because how they were dressed, and he was killed by Ivor because, once again, to avenge his son Carl. And finally, we had Veros. He was a member of Kalmar's rebellion and helped Tarek in sneaking into the tower to save the Doctor Romana, and I think he was quite interested in the weapons as well, so to speak. So our villains, we had three who rule. They were Vizargo, Camilla, and Orcon, and they were astronauts aboard the Hydrax, and they ended up in E-Space, and their original names were Captain Mars Sharkey, who became Zargo, Lauren Macmillan, who became Camilla, and Anthony O'Connor, who became Orcon. And they were turned into the vampires by the great vampire, first becoming immortal. Zargo was the king, while Camilla was the queen, and Orcon was pretty much their advisor, and he pretty and Orcon was pretty much like responsible for like the machinations and the rulings of the of the of the vampire planet, so to speak. And they pretty much ruled with fear, and they forbade any knowledge whatsoever. And fortunately they lost their immortality when the Doctor launched one of their shuttles into the atmosphere and pretty much killed the great vampire, which caused them to rapidly decay and age to death. And because he lived for like a very, very long time. I really liked them. I think they were very interesting villains, and it was very interesting to see vampires in Doctor Who. And of course, our main villain was the Great Vampire. He was more powerful than any other vampires, and they pretty much needed a strike to the heart to die, or a stake in the heart to die. And I liked how mysterious the story was. We do see a glimpse of how mysterious and scary the vampire was, and we see a glimpse of it on Talmar's scanner. It looked very terrifying. It looked like a very huge. It definitely looked like a mix of a giant bat and Azal from the demons. That's how scary it was. And in terms of thought in the story, I do wish the story was a bit more gothic, keeping some of the scientific elements. But obviously, if it was more gothic, it would have gone against Nathan Turner and Christopher H. Bidmead wanted Doctor Who to be more based on hard science. And actually, Terrence Dicks actually had a bit of a disagreement with Christopher H. Bidmead because Dicks wanted the story to be more gothic, pretty much mirroring the Philip Hinchcliffe era, but Christopher H. Bidmead wanted the story to be more rooted on hard science and didn't want any more gothic elements as it was already. And it also meant the rest of the villagers were unusually forgotten, but even they did play a bit of a part in the first two parts of the story. So to conclude, I think State of Decay is a very different Doctor Who story that successfully dabbles in vampire lore and is a bit of a low-key throwback to the Philip Hinchcliffe era of Doctor Who. So I give State of Decay an 8 out of 10. My next review will be Warrior's Gate, which will be the final story of the E-Space Trilogy, which sees the departure of Romana and K9, and the final 3 stories of the Tom Baker era. So thanks for watching this review. Please let me know what your thoughts of State of Decay, and please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already, and follow me on the social media sites linked in the description below. Until then, see you later.